My mother called my boss and told him I was mentally unfit to work. She had never even met him. She just wanted me fired. But my boss had dealt with a toxic parent before. He recorded the entire conversation without her knowing. Then he handed me the file and said, "This might help you." That recording became the key piece of evidence in my restraining order hearing. Before I tell you how it ended, drop your city in the comments. I want to know who's listening. Now, let me go back to the day everything started. My name is Claire, and I was 24 when my mother tried to destroy my career. She had done this before, called landlords, old friends, even a college professor, but never my employer. This time, she picked the wrong boss. I had been working at a small marketing firm for 2 years, building a life she couldn't control. The call lasted 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, she told my boss I was delusional, unstable, and a danger to myself. She said I needed to be fired so I'd come home. She thought that would break me. Instead, it gave me the evidence I needed to finally break free. But to understand why she did it, I have to tell you about the 17 years before that call. The years where I learned exactly how far a mother's love can twist when it's really about control. I was 7 years old the first time I understood that my mother's love had a limit. I had made a friend at school named Jenny, and Jenny's mom let her eat ice cream before dinner. When I mentioned it at home, my mother sat me down and explained that Jenny's family wasn't our kind of people. She said it calmly, like she was telling me the stove was hot. I never played at Jenny's house again. That was the pattern. Every time I reached for something outside her orbit, she pulled me back. By the time I was 12, I had learned to keep my voice low and my wants small. My mother controlled what I wore, what I read, who I called, and what I said to my teachers. She checked my backpack every night. She read my journals. She once called my 6th grade teacher to demand that I be moved to a different desk because I sat next to a boy whose family she didn't like. The teacher complied. Nobody ever said no to my mother. High school was worse. She monitored my phone, installed tracking software on my laptop, and timed my drive home from school down to the minute. If I was late, she demanded an explanation with photos. I stopped trying to argue. I learned that arguing meant escalation, more restrictions, fewer privileges, longer silences. Her favorite punishment was to pretend I didn't exist for days at a time. She would walk past me in the hallway without speaking. She would cook dinner for herself and my father and eat without calling me to the table. I would sit in my room and listen to the sound of her silence. I got into college 200 miles away. I thought distance would change things. It didn't. She called my resident advisor in the first week to check on me. She called my professors to make sure I was attending class. She called my roommate's parents to introduce herself. I started lying just to have privacy. I told her my schedule was different than it actually was. I told her I had a study group when I was actually just sitting alone in the library, breathing. By junior year, she wanted me to transfer to a school closer to home. I refused. She retaliated by cutting off my tuition for 1 semester, hoping I would be forced to drop out. I took out loans. I worked 2 jobs. I graduated on time with honors, but I was exhausted. Her response to my graduation was a text message that said, "You could have done this without all the drama." After college, I moved to a city 3 hours away. I got a job at a small marketing firm. I found an apartment I could afford on my salary. I thought maybe adulthood would finally draw a line she couldn't cross. I was wrong. She called my landlord pretending to be me and told him I was moving out at the end of the month. I had to show up at his office with my lease and my ID to prove I was still staying. He believed me, but the embarrassment stayed. I changed apartments. I didn't tell her the new address. She found it anyway through a credit check service. She started sending letters, then packages. Then she showed up at my office building lobby during my lunch break unannounced. The receptionist called my desk and said my mother was waiting for me. I told her I was busy. She waited for 2 hours until I finally walked past her and said nothing. She followed me to the parking lot, calling my name. I drove home shaking. That was the year my boss, David, noticed something was wrong. David was in his late 40s, blunt but fair. He had come from a family that was complicated in its own way. His father had been a controlling man who tried to sabotage his career out of jealousy. David had cut him off years ago. He recognized the signs in me before I talked about it. He said, "Is there someone who keeps showing up here who's not supposed to?" I broke down and told him everything over a cup of coffee in the break room. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, If she calls here again, let me know beforehand. I'll handle it. I didn't think she would call. She had already tried that once before at my previous job, but that boss had just told her I was busy and hung up. This time was different. This time, she had a new reason. 2 weeks before the call, I had changed my phone number without telling her. I had stopped checking her emails. I had not responded to a single message in 3 months. I had finally started to believe I could escape. That silence drove her past every boundary she had ever ignored. She needed a way to reach me that I could not block, so she went after the one connection I could not sever. She called my employer. David was at his desk when his office phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. He picked up. A woman's voice asked for him by name. She said, "This is Claire's mother, and I need to tell you something important about your employee." David's hand moved toward the record button on his phone. He had told me he would. He kept his promise. My mother began to speak. She did not know that every word she said was being saved. She did not know that her love, twisted into control, was about to become the sword that cut the rope. And I was about to get the key to a door I had been trying to open for 24 years. That night, I got home and listened to the recording David had sent me. He emailed it as an MP3 file with a note that said, "You might want to sit down for this." I put my headphones on and pressed play. My mother's voice filled my ears, calm and polished, the voice she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. She introduced herself by my full legal name and said she was calling out of concern. Concern. Then she began to describe me. She told David I had a history of mental instability dating back to adolescence. She said I had been diagnosed with conditions that didn't exist. She claimed I was off my medication and had stopped seeing my therapist. She said I was delusional and paranoid, and that I believed people were following me. She said I had threatened to harm myself, and that my father and she were terrified I would do something drastic if I kept working. She said the stress of my job was making me worse. She said the best thing for everyone was if I was let go so I could come home, where I could be supervised. The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She lied 17 times. I counted. Every claim was fabricated except the address of my apartment, which she had somehow obtained. She named a doctor I had never met. She described a hospitalization that never happened. She cried at the 2-minute mark, exactly on cue, the way she always did when she wanted someone to believe her. I listened to it 3 times in a row. The first time I felt sick. The second time I felt rage. The third time I felt something I had never felt before, clarity. This was not a mother trying to save her child. This was a woman trying to destroy her daughter's independence because she could not control it. The lies were too specific, too rehearsed, too well crafted to be a moment of panic. She had planned this. She had written a script and performed it. The next morning, I went to David's office. He closed the door and sat down across from me. He said, "I told you I would handle it." He handed me a USB drive with the original recording. He said, "Keep this somewhere safe, make copies. If you ever need to prove what she is capable of, this is your proof." I asked him why he recorded it. He said, "Because my father did the same thing to my boss 20 years ago. I lost that job." I promised myself I would never let it happen to someone else if I could stop it. I thanked him. He said, "Don't thank me, use it." For 2 weeks, I did nothing. I carried the USB drive in my purse everywhere I went. I made 3 copies and hid them in different places. I told no one except my best friend Rachel. Rachel said, "You need a lawyer." I said, "I can't afford a lawyer." She said, "There are free legal clinics for domestic violence cases." I said, "She's not violent." Rachel said, "She's trying to destroy your life. That's violence." That conversation planted a seed. I started researching. I learned that in my state, a restraining order could be filed by anyone who had experienced harassment, stalking, or a credible threat. I learned that the legal standard was preponderance of the evidence, meaning the judge only had to believe it was more likely than not that the harassment occurred. I learned that recorded phone calls could be introduced as evidence if the person who made the recording was a party to the conversation. David was the one who recorded it. He was a party to the call. The recording was legal and admissible. I also learned that my mother had escalated beyond that one call. I discovered she had contacted 3 of my former coworkers from the marketing firm. She had looked them up on LinkedIn and sent them messages claiming I was in a mental health crisis. and asking them to let her know if I was acting strangely. 2 of them forwarded the messages to me. One of them believed her and called HR to report their concerns. HR opened a file on me. I had to sit down with a manager and explain that my mother had a pattern of fabricating emergencies. They believed me, but the files stayed. I found out she had called my landlord again, this time pretending to be my therapist. She told him I was a danger to myself and that he should consider terminating my lease for the safety of other tenants. My landlord called me to verify. I sent him the recording. He apologized and said he would not take any action based on a phone call, but I saw the look on his face when he said it. He was uncomfortable. She had planted doubt. I started logging everything. Every call, every message, every third-party contact. I created a spreadsheet with dates, times, and summaries. I printed out the LinkedIn messages. I saved the landlord's voicemail. I went to the free legal clinic on a Tuesday afternoon and waited 2 hours to speak with a volunteer attorney named Susan. Susan was in her 60s, sharp, no nonsense. She listened to the recording. She read my spreadsheet. She looked at me and said, "This is textbook harassment. You have enough to file for a restraining order." I said, "I'm scared to do it." She said, "Good. That means you understand what it means, but scared doesn't mean wrong." She explained the process. I would need to file a petition at the courthouse. The court would issue a temporary restraining order if they found reasonable grounds. Then there would be a full hearing within 14 days. At the hearing, my mother would have a chance to respond. The judge would decide whether to make the order permanent for up to 3 years. I would have to confront her in a courtroom. I would have to play the recording in front of her. I went home and sat on my couch for 3 hours. I thought about what would happen if I filed. My mother would be served papers. She would rage. She would call everyone she knew and tell them I was crazy and that I had filed a false police report. She would probably show up at my apartment. My father would be caught in the middle. My extended family would take sides. I would lose people I loved. But I also thought about what would happen if I did not file. She would keep calling. She would keep lying. She would keep trying to burn down every structure I built. She would never stop because she believed she was right. The only way to make her stop was to force her to stop through legal means. I filled out the petition that night. I wrote out every incident I could remember, starting from the landlord call 2 years earlier. I attached the recording as an exhibit. I printed 4 copies. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse and handed my papers to the clerk. She reviewed them and said, "Wait here." I sat on a wooden bench for 45 minutes. Then a different clerk called my name and handed me a temporary restraining order. It was effective immediately. My mother was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my home, my workplace, and my vehicle. She was ordered not to contact me by any means, including through third parties. I walked out of the courthouse with a piece of paper that felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. I drove to work and handed a copy to David. He read it and nodded. "Good," he said. "Now brace yourself." 3 days later, a sheriff's deputy served my mother with the papers. She called me from an unknown number within an hour. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was shaking. She said, How dare you do this to your own mother? I have done everything for you, everything. You are going to regret this. I will fight this. I will tell the judge everything." I saved the voicemail. I added it to my spreadsheet. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. I had 13 days to prepare. 13 days to get my evidence organized, to rehearse what I would say, to steel myself for the moment I would have to look at my mother in a courtroom and tell a judge the truth about what she had done. On the 10th day, something happened that changed everything. My mother hired a lawyer, and that lawyer sent a letter to my attorney Susan demanding that I drop the restraining order or face a countersuit for defamation. The letter accused me of fabricating the entire story to gain a tactical advantage in a family dispute. It claimed the recording was doctored. It threatened to sue me for emotional distress. Susan called me. "They're bluffing," she said, "but they're trying to scare you. Are you scared?" I thought about the recording. I thought about the spreadsheet. I thought about the 17 lies she told in 4 minutes. I thought about my grandfather's kitchen table, the one I never had, and the other table where my mother sat alone now, scribbling a story that never happened. "No," I said, "let's go to court." The night before the hearing, I could not sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. I imagined my mother on the witness stand. I imagined her crying. I imagined her turning to the judge and saying the same words she had said my entire life. I'm just trying to help her. I imagined the judge believing her. I imagined losing. I imagined her winning and the order being denied and her showing up at my door the next day with a smile. At 4 a.m, I got up and made coffee. I opened my laptop and played the recording one more time. I listened to her voice, polished and calm, lying with precision. I realized something that had not occurred to me before. She was not just trying to get me fired. She was trying to prove to herself that she still mattered. She needed to believe that she could still reach me, still affect me, still control the narrative. The call was not about my job. It was about her power. And the recording was the proof that she had finally overreached. She had done it in plain sight, on a recorded line, in front of a witness who had no reason to protect her. That recording was not just evidence of harassment. It was a confession of who she really was. I closed my laptop at 5:30. I showered. I put on a navy blazer that Rachel had lent me. I drove to the courthouse and sat on the same wooden bench I had sat on when I filed the petition. At 8:45, my mother walked through the doors. She was wearing a cream-colored dress I had never seen, heels, pearls. She looked like she was attending a church service. She did not see me at first. Then she turned and our eyes met. There was no warmth in her gaze. There was no apology, no regret, no fear. There was only calculation. She was studying me, measuring me, trying to predict what I would do. I held her stare for 3 seconds. Then I looked away. I did not need to prove anything to her anymore. I only needed to prove it to the judge. At 9 o'clock, the bailiff called the case. I stood up. My mother stood up. We walked into the courtroom together, separated by 6 feet of air and a lifetime of damage. The judge was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses and a calm expression. She looked at the file, then at us, and said, "Let's begin." I took the stand first. I told my story from the beginning. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I answered every question Susan asked. When it was time to play the recording, the bailiff set up a speaker. The room went quiet. My mother's voice filled the courtroom. I watched her face as she heard her own words played back. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She stared straight ahead with an expression I had never seen before, something between defiance and satisfaction. When the recording ended, the judge turned to my mother's lawyer. He stood up and began his cross-examination. "Ms. Claire, isn't it true that you have a history of mental health issues? Isn't it true that your mother was only trying to help you because she was genuinely worried about your safety? Isn't it true that you have exaggerated these events because you are angry at your mother for being overprotective?" I looked at the lawyer, then at my mother, then at the judge. I took a breath and said, "No, that's not true, and I have the evidence to prove it." My attorney, Susan, stood and approached the judge's bench with a manila folder. "Your Honor, we have additional evidence that directly contradicts the respondent's claim that this was a single, isolated call made out of maternal concern." The judge nodded. Susan handed the folder to the bailiff. "This is a log of 27 phone calls made by the respondent to third parties regarding the petitioner over a period of 18 months. Included are calls to employers, landlords, former professors, and a licensed therapist." The judge read silently. The courtroom was still. My mother's lawyer shifted in his seat. My mother's face did not change, but I saw her hands grip the edge of the table. Susan continued. "I would like to call our next witness, Dr. Alina Marquez, licensed clinical psychologist who treated the petitioner from ages 16 to 18. I had not known Susan was going to call her. I turned and watched Dr. Marquez walk to the stand. She was the only therapist I had ever trusted. She testified that she had treated me for anxiety, not psychosis, that I had never been hospitalized, that my mother had called her office twice requesting confidential information, which she had refused to provide, that my mother had left voicemails claiming I was a danger to myself, which Dr. Marquez had documented and reported to her supervisor as concerning but unfounded. Then Susan played a second recording. I had not heard this one before. David had kept it quiet. It was a voicemail my mother left on my office line 2 weeks before she called David. The message was calm at first. "Claire, this is your mother. I know you're avoiding me. That's fine. But I need you to know that I will not stop until you come to your senses." Then her voice shifted, lower, deliberate. If you think you can hide behind a job, you are wrong. I will call every single person you work with until no one in this city will hire you. Do you understand me?" The room was silent. The judge removed her glasses and set them on the bench. She looked at my mother. "Mrs. Clare's mother, do you deny leaving that voicemail?" My mother stood. I was emotional, I was scared. She had cut me off completely. What mother wouldn't say something she didn't mean out of love? The judge held up a hand. "Please sit down, you will have your turn." My mother's lawyer cross-examined Dr. Marquez, trying to suggest I had manipulated her. Dr. Marquez did not budge. She produced session notes, dates, and a letter I had written at 17 describing my fear of my mother's control. The lawyer sat down. Then Susan called David to the stand. He walked in wearing a suit I had never seen him wear. He looked like a man who had no fear of this woman. He testified that he had recorded the call because he suspected it was sabotage, that he had experienced similar behavior from his own father, and that he had verified the recording's authenticity with a forensic audio expert. He stated that he had never heard a parent speak about their child the way my mother spoke about me. The judge asked him directly, "Mr. David, in your professional opinion, was this call about concern for the employee's well-being?" David paused. "Your Honor, if she was concerned, she would have called me privately and asked how Claire was doing. She didn't. She demanded I fire Claire and told me to say it was for performance reasons. She handed me a script. That's not concern. That's a hit job." My mother's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. I watched my mother's face crack for the first time, a small twitch at the corner of her mouth. After David stepped down, Susan rested. My mother's lawyer called my mother to the stand. She walked slowly, composed, and sat with her hands folded. She told the story she had rehearsed her whole life. She said I was always a difficult child. She said I had been diagnosed by a family doctor who had died years ago and could not be called to verify with bipolar disorder. She said I refused treatment. She said she was desperate. She said the call to David was a last resort to save me from myself. She cried. She paused. She looked at the judge with eyes that had worked on everyone else for 40 years. The judge asked one question. "Mrs. Clare's mother, did you ever once in that call express concern for your daughter's safety without also demanding she be fired?" My mother opened her mouth, closed it. "I wanted her to come home." "Answer the question, please." "I said what I needed to say to get her out of that place." The judge wrote something down. My mother's lawyer tried to redirect, but the damage was done. Then something happened that I had not expected. My father walked into the courtroom. He had not been present during the earlier part of the hearing. He approached the bailiff and asked to speak. The judge allowed it. He was sworn in. He looked at me once briefly and then at my mother. He said, "Your Honor, I have been married to this woman for 32 years. I have watched her control every aspect of our daughter's life. I have stayed silent because I was afraid. I am not afraid anymore." My mother stood. "You cannot do this." The judge banged her gavel. "Sit down or I will hold you in contempt." My father continued. He described the calls, the tracking software, the letters to landlords, the campaign of manipulation. He pulled a stack of papers from his jacket. "She kept a journal," he said. "She wrote down every move Claire made. She planned the phone call to David 3 weeks in advance. I found this in her desk." The courtroom erupted. My mother's lawyer demanded a mistrial. The judge denied it. She reviewed the journal entries, page after page of notes. "Call employer on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Mention suicidal ideation. Say she is off medication. Refuse to give direct evidence. Sound loving." My mother stared at her husband like she had never seen him before. I stared at my father like I had never seen him before either. The judge adjourned the hearing for lunch and said she would deliver her ruling at 2 o'clock. I sat in the hallway on a bench next to Rachel. I could not speak. My father walked out of the courtroom and sat down across from me. He said, "I should have done this years ago. I am sorry." I said, "Why now?" He said, "Because I heard the recording. Because I realized she would never stop. Because you deserved at least one parent who told the truth." At 2 o'clock, we filed back in. The judge took the bench. She looked at my mother, then at me. She said, "This is not a close call. The evidence is overwhelming." The petitioner has demonstrated a clear pattern of harassment, stalking, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The recorded phone call alone would have been sufficient, but the additional evidence, the journal, the testimony of witnesses, the therapist's records, leaves no doubt about the respondent's intent. She granted a permanent restraining order for a period of 3 years. She ordered my mother to immediately surrender any firearms she owned. Though my mother had never owned a gun, it was standard procedure. She ordered her to complete a psychological evaluation. She awarded me a small amount of attorney's fees. She looked at my mother and said, "Ma'am, you are not a victim. You are a person who used your child's trust as a weapon. This court will not allow you to continue." My mother stood. She did not cry. She did not rage. She picked up her purse and walked out of the courtroom without looking at me. Her lawyer followed, gathering papers. My father stayed seated. He put his head in his hands. I walked out of the courthouse into sunlight that felt different from the light I had walked into that morning. I had spent 24 years trying to earn my mother's love. I had spent the last 4 months preparing to prove her dangerous. And now it was over. Not because she changed, but because a judge believed me. But here's the part nobody tells you about winning a restraining order. The order was just a piece of paper. The real battle was about to begin, because my mother did not leave quietly. She spent the next 6 months finding new ways to reach me through loopholes, through friends, through legal filings that challenged the order. She appealed the ruling. She filed a motion claiming I had perjured myself. She hired a private investigator to dig up anything from my past she could use. I had won the battle, but the war was far from finished, and the next phase would test me in ways I never anticipated. The appeal came first. My mother's lawyer filed it within 30 days, arguing that the judge had been biased by the emotional testimony and that the recording should have been excluded because David had not informed her she was being recorded. The appeal went to a 3-judge panel. I had to wait 60 days for a decision. Those 60 days were the longest of my life. Every morning, I checked the mail expecting a letter that would overturn everything. Every night, I went to sleep wondering if the order would be voided, and she would show up at my door. I kept working. David had become more than a boss. He was an ally. He told me if the appeal succeeded, he would testify again. He told me if I needed time off, it was mine. I didn't take it. Work was the only place I felt normal. I had a desk. I had tasks. I had coworkers who didn't know the details and didn't ask. The private investigator she hired was more insidious. He posed as a journalist working on a story about family estrangement. He called 3 of my former roommates. He called my landlord again, using a different name. He even called the courthouse asking for a copy of the case file, which was public record. Susan called me when she found out. She said, "He's looking for anything he can use to impeach your credibility at the appeal hearing. Do not talk to him. Do not engage. If he approaches you, call the police." I started looking over my shoulder. I stopped going to my usual coffee shop. I changed my route to work. I checked my rearview mirror obsessively. The man never approached me directly, but the knowledge that he was out there, paid by my mother to find dirt, was a constant low-level hum of anxiety. Then the appeal decision came. Susan called me on a Thursday afternoon. "It's denied, unanimous. The panel affirmed the trial court's ruling in full." I sat down on my couch. I didn't cry. I just breathed for a long moment. She continued, "There's more. The panel included a finding that the appeal was frivolous and intended to harass. They've ordered your mother to pay your attorney's fees for the appeal as well." That was unusual. That was the court sending a message. I called David. I called Rachel. I called my father. He had been living alone in the house since my mother moved out. She had left the week after the hearing, taking only what she could fit in her car. She had not returned. He told me he was selling the house and moving to a smaller place. He said he had finally hired his own lawyer to start divorce proceedings. The restraining order was now permanent for 3 years. It could be renewed after that if I could show continued need. But something shifted in me when the appeal was denied. I stopped being afraid of her. I started being angry. The private investigator stopped calling after the appeal ruling. My mother's lawyer withdrew from the case. She represented herself in the next motion, a desperate attempt to modify the order so she could attend my grandmother's funeral in the same county. The judge denied it. She could attend via remote video. She did not. She chose to skip it rather than watch on a screen. That was the moment I realized she was not fighting to reconnect. She was fighting to win. And winning meant controlling me, not loving me. When she could not control me, she lost interest. The funeral passed. She did not try to contact me. The silence that followed was the deepest silence I had ever experienced. It was the silence of a door closing forever. Months passed. I continued therapy with a new therapist. Dr. Marquez had retired. I worked on rebuilding my sense of self. I had spent so many years defined by her that I did not know who I was without the fight. I started journaling. I joined a support group for adult survivors of parental emotional abuse. I learned that my story was not unique. There were others, hundreds of them. They understood without explanation. 1 year after the hearing, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my mother. The envelope had no return address, but I recognized her handwriting. I opened it standing in my kitchen. Inside was a single page. She wrote that she hoped I was doing well. She wrote that she had been seeing a therapist and was working on herself. She wrote that she loved me. She did not apologize. She did not take responsibility. She wrote, "I love you," like it was a key that should unlock everything. I read it 3 times. Then I set it on the counter. I did not respond. I had learned something important. Love without accountability is just manipulation with a kind face. I had spent my whole life waiting for her to say those words. When she finally did, they were hollow because they came with no admission of what she had done. 2 weeks later, I received a second letter. This one was different. It was from the State Bar Association. My mother had filed a complaint against Susan, accusing her of coercing me into filing the restraining order and of manufacturing evidence. The bar investigated. They reviewed the recording. They interviewed David. They interviewed my father. They dismissed the complaint with prejudice, calling it without merit and apparently retaliatory. But the letter shook me. She was not done. Even with the restraining order, even with the appeal denied, even with the bar complaint dismissed, she was still trying. She had found a new angle. She would never stop. I understood then that the restraining order was not a cure. It was a shield, and I would have to carry that shield for the rest of her life or mine. The final surprising detail came 6 months later. I was cleaning out a storage unit I had rented after my father sold the house. Among boxes of old photos and kitchen appliances, I found a small metal lockbox. It had my mother's maiden name on a label. I almost threw it away. Instead, I pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to me, all never sent. They spanned 20 years. The earliest was dated when I was 4 years old. The most recent was from the month before she called David. I sat on the floor of the storage unit and read them. They were not angry. They were not controlling. They were sad. She wrote about her own mother, who had been cold and distant. She wrote about feeling inadequate as a parent. She wrote that she was terrified of losing me and that the only way she knew to keep me close was to hold on tight. She wrote that she knew she was hurting me but could not stop. She wrote that she hoped one day I would forgive her. They were confessions she never had the courage to send. They were the truth buried under years of lies and control. They did not excuse what she did, but they explained it. And for the first time, I felt something other than anger. I felt a quiet, complicated grief. I closed the lockbox. I took it home. I did not show it to anyone. I did not respond to her letters, but I kept it. Because it reminded me that beneath the woman who called my boss and lied about me was another woman, a younger woman, who was also afraid and broken and did not know how to love without hurting. That did not make her safe. That did not make her right, but it made her human. And that was a harder truth to hold than any lie she ever told. The 3-year order is still in effect as I speak. I have 1 year left. I do not know if I will renew it. I do not know if she will try again. But I am not the same person I was when I walked into that courthouse. I am not afraid of her anymore. I am not angry at her anymore. I am simply living my life, building my own kitchen table, and hoping that one day she will find the courage to write the letters she actually sends. I think about those unsent letters often. They sit in a lockbox at the back of my closet, and I have not opened it since the day I found it. But I know they are there. And knowing they exist changes something. It does not erase the phone call. It does not undo the lies she told my boss, my landlord, my professors, my friends. But it adds a dimension I did not have before. It reminds me that people are not just what they do to us. They are also what they carry and never say. My mother and I have not spoken in almost 2 years. The restraining order remains in place. I have not decided whether I will renew it when it expires. I do not know if she has changed. I do not know if she is still the same woman who planned a phone call for 3 weeks and delivered it with practiced tears. I do not know if the letters she never sent mean she is capable of growth, or if they are just another way she held onto her pain without releasing it. That uncertainty is not comfortable. But I have learned to live inside it. What I know for certain is this: the phone call that was meant to destroy my career became the evidence that freed me. The boss who recorded it gave me more than a file. He gave me permission to trust someone with the truth. The therapist who testified gave me back my medical history, which she had tried to rewrite. And my father, after 32 years of silence, gave me the one thing I had stopped hopping for. He chose me. If you are listening to this and you are in the middle of a similar war, I want you to hear something. You are not crazy. You are not ungrateful. You are not a bad child for protecting yourself from a parent who hurts you. The guilt will come. It will tell you that you are being cruel, that family is forever, that she loves you in her own way. That guilt is a ghost. It has no power except what you give it. The love you deserved was never supposed to cost you your independence. And the parent who demands your silence in exchange for their approval is not offering love. They are offering a cage with a familiar door. I still go to therapy. I still check my rearview mirror sometimes. I still flinch when my phone rings from an unknown number. But I also wake up in my own apartment, in a city I chose, with a job I built, and I am free. Not because she let me go. Because I took the key she handed me when she made that recorded call, and I walked out. If this story connected with you, I want to know what you would protect if you had to choose one thing. A place, a person, a promise. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you have ever had to draw a boundary with someone you love, you are not alone. Share this with someone who needs to hear that. Subscribe if you want more stories about the moments that change everything. I will see you in the next one.